Hello, welcome to another episode of Unstructured Unlocked. I'm your host, Chris Wells, VP of R&D at Indico Data. My guest today is Art Borden. He's a veteran with over a decade in the underwriting process and technology space. Art, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you for bringing me in this morning. I'm looking forward to it.
Of course, yeah, this should be a good one. To kick it off, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and your background?
Sure, Chris. Well, thanks. I have many years in the industry. I lowly beginnings as a claim representative back at Allstate coming out of college, and found insurance to be kind of an interesting career path and have stuck with it since that time. So I have a full career of it. Most recently, I've been involved in a lot of the underwriting process and technology work in the industry, with recent positions at both CNA and Zurich. And so I've lived this space for quite some time, and have spent many hours, as probably many of the folks who will end up seeing this have, trying to figure out how to move the industry forward, given some of the new technologies that are dropping into our environment.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for insurance. There's sort of a tech renaissance going on. Um, I must say, when I was an undergrad, I did not find the insurance space very interesting, although I'm starting to change my tone on that. What was it that sucked you in?
You know, what I'd say about the industry is that you have an opportunity to get in and do a lot of different things. So I've been inside of the claim space, and then account management and direct customer facing roles, and then kind of moving into business architecture and technology, and all of the development opportunities to try to bring technology to bear in the underwriting process. I've managed in my career to do a lot of different things, and I think that people have who have been in the industry a while discover that, right, that there's a lot of different opportunities within the industry. I can say honestly, I've never been bored in my career. I've always found
Okay.
something that is really excited me about the work that I'm doing, and it's carried me through my career.
That's exciting to hear. For
Yeah.
those of you who are starting out your career, don't sleep on insurance. A lot of
Well,
interesting stuff going on.
believe me, it was the furthest thing from my mind when I got out of college. I never ever even considered it as a possible career. But sort of once you're in, you sort of realize the breadth and depth of it, and the passion that people bring to the industry. It's a huge marketplace out there. It has huge opportunities for anyone coming into the industry. So my view of it is give it a shot, because there's really a lot of good stuff going on in the industry today.
Yeah. Okay. On that note, I know that you're at this point in your career, you're in sort of another exciting transition time, but I wonder if you could sort of turn the clock back and tell us some of the highlights of your career so far, places you've been, things you've done, people you've worked with.
Yeah, and so working out in the field, in front of the glass, trying to process business, you get this opinion that you could go in a home office and change it all and fix it in a day. And what you realize is the complexity there is just a bit overwhelming. And when I got in, it was kind of the .com kind of space, and I was very interested in the technology piece, and that's what drew me into some of the process and technology work I ended up getting into. And honestly, the things that I found really attractive were things like business architecture. How do you think about how people, process, and technology fit together to make the process and the company a success? And if you don't have all three legs of those stools working in harmony, you really do have a failure to launch in many of these initiatives. So I liked that space, and when I got into it, I did a lot of process redesign work, a lot of connection to emerging technologies, and how do those sort of maybe support each other, and what is the organizational change management implication of all of that, because it can be seen as a stodgy industry, but you're constantly in a state of flux, in a state of change. How do you get folks to really understand the new possibilities in terms of what the technology can bring to you. And so I sort of worked through that as I came into that side of the industry, and did a lot of business process redesign work, and really worked carefully with the field, trying to understand what their pain points were, and kind of carried that work through my kind of my more recent career path, which has had to do with a lot with technology and transformation.
Interesting. There's a whole lot there that I want to poke at. Let's start with, you mentioned going back to the dot-com era. Insurance products they're complicated animals, as you mentioned, and there's a whole lot that goes on sort of behind the curtain to make sure that those products get delivered well. How have you seen the role of technology in that stack change in the last couple of decades, as both
Sure.
the industry has matured and you've advanced in your career?
Yeah, so there's been a huge desire to adopt more modern platforms for policy administration. So you see entrants like Guidewire and Duck Creek have come into the marketplace and have really driven a lot of product evolution and product enablement work for most modern insurance companies, are a good part of the marketplace, and they continue their work. What you learn in that process, and something I had to learn as well, is you describe the complexity of the product, and being able to enable that, and how it's so interconnected. The products are so interconnected within the insurance
Yeah.
industry, right? So you have to be able to underwrite it, you have to be able to rate it, you have to be able to bill it, you have to be able to send downstream to the various states and bureaus all the information that they're interested in keeping track of. You have to be able to actuarially consume all of the data that comes from that, and sort of revise your products and your rates as you go forward. And you begin to realize the complexity that sits behind all of that, and how hard it is to change. While all this is going on, you've got this evolution of technology from sort of, this very difficult to compose language of COBOL and such, that really was the way that these systems were built, to more sort of low code, no code type of approaches, and being able to have power users at a desk modify products and make those updates. And that in and of itself has driven organizational change management issues as you've looked to make those processes more efficient.
Yeah, so that brings me to another item from your introduction, which is also a theme of this podcast, as I talk to folks from a lot of different industries. Um, how how have you seen, you talked about process redesign. How have you seen the relationship between the folks that are trying to automate the process and the folks that are trying to understand and maybe retool the process, evolve in the last, I would say, let's call it 5 years? How have those partnerships changed?
Yeah, so you have in the holistic delivery of these technology projects, you've seen the onset of agile style delivery, and being able to have folks from the business side of the equation sit side by side in a very collaborative way with your IT partners
Yep.
has really been a huge shift. I mean, what you historically had was a more waterfall type of delivery, where you'd have folks gathering a bunch of requirements, going off and returning 6 months later with a product that didn't look very much like what they had hoped for. And now, at least in the way that products are delivered now, you have this kind of collaborative type of spirit, I think, that has continued to evolve within the industry. Now, some folks are early in their agile journey. Some have been doing this very formally for a number of years now. I know for us, we made that conversion, and it is a little difficult to get your mindset around set up properly around that. It changes how you gather requirements, it changes how you talk to one another, but once you get there, it really does make a huge difference in terms of delivering a quality product to the business. So those types of things have really changed how I would say technology and business have worked together. Again, it brings forth a change management issue, right? I keep coming back to that, but it really does force a change in terms of how folks think about building out some of the systems and capabilities that are needed today to be successful.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. It's interesting you mentioned COBOL, on mainframes, and I think a lot of folks who, like myself, who are outside of the insurance industry, initially scoff at that. But the reason COBOL on mainframes has stuck around so long is because it works really well
Yep,
at scale. Now it's hard to change, but it
yep,
works really well at scale. And I think thematically, as we get started here, one of the things you need in any industry, but insurance maybe more than anything, is stuff that works well at scale. And I think, again, outsider's view, one of the things that the industry is starting to understand is that you have to have change management that works at scale.
yep,
So
yep.
I'm interested to hear more about that as we go.
Yeah, those applications, those old applications are bulletproof. They really are.
Bulletproof.
And
Yeah.
they just keep chugging along. And but you're right when it comes to changing them and updating those products, just understanding. I mean, if you're inside of an industry that has a big legacy issue, it gets hard to even understand what the code is doing inside of
Yeah.
the application. So you find yourself having to mine the old rules out of the old system just to
Yeah.
even understand what you want that system to do, your next system to do. And that's really time consuming. It's difficult. And boy, I'll tell you, try to get a new programmer that just come out of college who you then tell, hey, for the next 10 years, I want you to really focus on COBOL. It's tough to recruit those folks too. You see a lot of people coming out of retirement to do these types of projects because they're the ones that learn that code and are still the ones that can actually help you.
Yeah, and those new programmers coming out, they don't have the context that, like,
Right.
the reason the languages you like Python, exist is because lots of people have figured out the really tough stuff like
Yep,
COBOL and C,
yep,
C++. So
yep.
yeah, it's a great perspective.
But it's
Um,
interesting now,
yeah,
I'd say one more quick thing. The migration to the cloud and bringing
mhm,
this data out is sort of softening the blow a little bit in terms of the legacy. Because quite honestly, if you can get the data over there, you can then lay in some of the newer technologies on top of the data sets that
yeah,
you're building in the cloud, and it does help you get around some of your legacy issues.
yeah. That's a great point. The cloud really does help you decouple these
Yep,
things from
yep,
one another, almost by design. Okay, let's take a couple of steps back now that we've
for
gone
sure.
all the way to mainframes. Tell me, so a lot of our listeners are not in the insurance industry. They come more from the technology and automation and data side. So if you could take a little bit of a step back and just tell us what an underwriting organization looks like, from the tech side, the management side, product side, just whatever would be useful in understanding where you're coming from.
Yeah, so I'll talk about my most recent experience and CNA, for instance. We had a centralized operations group that was responsible for receiving the submission data in the door. Maybe it came to the underwriter first, but it got flipped over to operations to get it registered in our systems.
Okay.
And
And
then
if I could break in,
sure.
just when you say submission data, like what's in that package?
Yeah, so if you think about underwriting as a lot like a mortgage application, right? So you have a lot of information that describes the company that you're looking to underwrite. And oftentimes that'll be a description of their operation. It might be a list of all the locations that they have, the number of employees that they employ, the types of coverages and things that the company is looking to purchase from you, maybe a list of automobiles that they have. And I'm thinking about this more from a commercial market, a little bigger sized risk, but that's kind of a profile, right? There's a lot of information you
Hmm.
need to know, just like the bank needs to know a lot about you. They need to know your assets, your wealth, a description of you, a description of the property that you're looking to underwrite. All of those things are kind of true in a similar kind of view of what insurance is about. And that information comes in, and it's basically a request from a producer, maybe what might be called a broker, somebody who's trying to place the business with you and help that customer
Okay.
work through all of this. So they assemble all of this information and they sort of send it into the insurance company asking for a quotation on that particular risk. And once that hits our doors as an insurer, we have to do a few things. We have some legal obligations to make sure that that company that's coming in the door is legit, not foreign owned, all of these
Okay.
types of things. Those are rules that we have to follow.
So
Um,
know your customer types
Know
of
your
stuff. That's
customer,
yeah.
basically,
Okay.
that's it. And then we have to get it into our systems because the goal is to start to move this through a process that sits within our organization that might start out by getting it through the operational piece first. There's some data gathering and analysis the underwriter has to do preliminarily to say, hey, this one, kind of a quick thumbs up, thumbs down to see if it's going to move forward or not. And then, if you decide that you're going to go after it, and again, on commercial space, you would then start to throw a lot of resources at it. You'd send it to someone to actually enter all of the information
Ah,
about that risk into a system. That system can calculate rates. You will do some analysis about the nature of risk. What types of exposures do they have? Are they driving cars around the city, or is it out in the country? Are they doing hazardous type of work, or are they office workers who are less exposed? So you start to get at what is the nature of the risk that you're insuring, and those carry different rates, different considerations that the underwriter needs to go through. Now, if you think about every type of industry in the country, there's a huge diversity of that type of question set that you're applying to
yeah.
each every risk. And you really, that's where the rub is for the underwriter. They're having to know, kind of looking at that risk, all of the possible things that can go wrong,
Yeah.
right? And that's a difficult thing, right? There's a lot of information they have to keep in their head, and that's the role of technology in this, right? How do you use the
Okay.
technology to present to the underwriter a set of information that allows them to accelerate what I call decision velocity? You want them to
Okay.
be able to make good decisions fast about what they're seeing. Now, for smaller risks, you do that through what we would call straight through automation, right? So you build up enough rules in a system, or you use enough models to simulate
Hmm.
what that might look like, and you push that through without a human touching it. As the risks grow, the ability to build those models to confidence starts to strain, right? You can't necessarily count on underwriting Ford Motor Company through a model so easily,
Okay.
right? Because
So
there's so
let
many. Go ahead.
let me hit the pause button there. What what fraction would you say are, go through straight through based on rules or whatever else?
Yeah, I think every company has a little different cut at that.
Yeah.
We tried to run 75 to 80% of small business and maybe 10% of middle market business. So there's
Okay.
a big difference, right? If I've got a storefront shop that's doing luggage repair, let's call it, and I've got this small shop, I could pretty effectively use straight through processing to figure out what is the
Okay.
likelihood of loss there and come up with a price that's competitive. There aren't that many exposures there, but
Okay.
when I'm trying to underwrite a light manufacturer who's building parts that might go into an automobile, for instance, the potential complexity there grows kind of geometrically.
Okay.
And so you have to be a little bit more careful about pushing that straight through. And maybe the underwriter needs to touch a few parts of that decision stream. Now, you can get a lot of it to go straight through, but it starts to get more complicated.
Okay. And so that's a great point. I was going to ask you like which axis, you decide to automate or not, where you make that decision. So complexity is a big piece of it, but of course, models and technology can sort
Yeah.
of, keep pace with complexity. So what is it about this complexity that makes it hard to automate? Is it something regulatory? Is it business need to have a human eye on it because of the relationship with the customer? Or is it just we haven't seen enough big deals like this? They're rare enough that we don't really have a good sense of what the rules might be.
Yeah. So I'm going to say yes.
Okay. Yeah, fair.
Because I think it's multivariate, right? You have a lot of different inputs to that equation, right? You might have severity issues. The potential for a large loss could drive you to have to touch that risk, right? So
Ah,
I've got some exposure that could be significant, and it could it could cause a large loss. But maybe the automobile fleet that they drive is not risky at all, right? That they're just
Okay.
sales folks, kind of tooling around, and you sort of know what they're going to get into, and so you can underwrite that risk pretty effectively. So there is a lot of complexity by product. There's a lot of complexity simply by the nature of the risks that you face.
Interesting. Would you say that there are certain products that are, let me ask this two ways. Historically have been ripe for sort of automation, and then, what do you think is the next one that's going to be, taken off the wall?
Yeah, certainly that's true. There are certain products that are a little easier to underwrite. Auto tends to be that way, though. There's a complexity there that is pretty astounding at times.
Yeah,
Property can be very straightforward. It can be very complex. If you think
yeah,
about some of the global warming impacts to the
sure.
world, right? And so flooding risk and fire risk and such is really kind of morphing a lot. So products can go in and out of favor. Cyber liability is one. For the longest time, who really worried so much about cyber liability? But now every company is, think about Amazon getting shut down because
Oh yeah,
of
yeah,
it getting hacked. It would be a huge, huge issue. So, and
yeah.
the
Even LastPass just got hacked,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
crazy.
I know you would not have expected that. So here you go. So yeah, there's a lot of variability in why things are more risky than others, and honestly, it's not static. It can
Yeah,
change. You can suddenly have a new emerging issue. I will hazard that batteries in electric cars may end up being something that people start to be concerned about because containing fires and things like that. And honestly, that's never been a concern because we just haven't had it before, that
yeah,
type of thing.
yeah.
So,
Interesting.
but what is the industry trying to do? Well,
Yeah,
that idea around, can we get all of this information gathered efficiently so we don't have to have a lot of folks typing it into systems? So can I machine read my submission?
yes,
And if I can machine read my submission, then could I go out to third-party data sources who know a lot about this particular risk or this particular industry and gather information electronically that keeps the underwriter from having to go research it themselves?
yeah,
And can I put that into a model, and can I output something that I can feel comfortable with? Those are the types of things that the industry is trying to get to save the human centric sort of wasted energy that people go through today to round out their understanding of a particular risk. And it's a very difficult to find a good underwriter these days. The economy
mm,
is such, when you've got an unemployment rate ticking along at 3. I think in the insurance industry it's less than 2. Some
whoa,
people would argue that it's 0 or negative.
yeah,
That it's very, very difficult to get a good underwriter. And oh, by the way, teach them everything about your archaic legacy systems that they need to know, which is a very
yeah,
difficult thing. So getting to a point where you can leverage the technology is really a big deal.
yeah. That's interesting. You mentioned a couple things that I want to tie together there. We at Indico we talk a lot about automation and processing by bots or AI or whatever it is, not as being something that displaces the human from the process, but puts them at the center with a bionic arm so they can
Yep.
move more faster. And it sounds like the insurance industry is thinking about these processes the same way. In fact, it sounds like you need more people. You just need them with better tools at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I'll go back to the phrase decision velocity. You really are trying to enable an underwriter to make their decisions faster with more confidence and less touch back to the insured or the
Mm,
insured's broker. Because if you've got two equal companies that are pestering your producer for information that one can gather electronically and never has to ask the
yeah,
question, and the other one's on the phone to them every single day, or firing off emails trying to clarify details, the broker, the producer, is going to be more interested in working with the efficient company, and it's faster, it's less hassle for them. They have to have fewer people on staff as well to support their business, and it has a cascading effect. So it's not only making our underwriters more efficient, but it's also putting a face out to the marketplace that says, hey, we're easy to deal with. We understand you. We go get information we don't have to ask you about. And we're able to make decisions very quickly and get you an answer, because getting an answer quickly for them is a really important part of their jobs.
Yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. And I want to swing the spotlight back to you a little bit. And I have a feeling that that concept of decision velocity is a key to answering this question. But how was success measured in your role?
Yeah. Yeah. So for us, I most recently had a couple of areas of accountability. One was product management. So all of that product complexity that you talked about in terms of
Yep.
that my success was measured by making the systems flexible, as flexible as possible. When I updated product and brought it into the system, and so I had accountability for implementing those products, and that for me was a big part of it. So what does that all entail? Well,
Yeah.
it entails figuring out how to best define those products, how to work best with my IT partners to build out the systems that enable those products. All of that is part of the role of someone in my role. And then secondly, the other piece was, how was I measured for success with respect to my peers is another
Okay.
aspect of this. So my peers would be the product owners for those particular products.
Ah,
So I have to help them build out updates to their product suite and give them new technology to speed up the underwriting process. So if I was able to implement a process or a procedure or a technology that helped speed up the process for the underwriters, that was a win. And they would count on me to do that, right? To actually implement systems that would make the underwriting process more efficient for them. So that was bringing in new technologies. It was thinking through their process, taking out waste and such in the process, and building in additional automation to support them.
okay. Interesting. And that sort of guides the conversation to the next phase, I think, which is we've talked, you mentioned submissions and intake. And so there's a bunch that I want to get at there. Um, the podcast is nominally about unstructured data, and I have learned recently that insurance submissions are full of it. So
They are.
talk to me a little bit more. You started talking about it a little bit earlier. I want to drill in now. What is in a submission, and where does it come in the door? Is it in the mail? Is it a fax? Is it email? What's in detail? What's in that bundle of stuff that comes in?
Again, I'll say yes. All those things will be part of that. There's various sizes of risk, but I'll deal with a little bit more complexity here to try to
Okay,
give some sense of
good.
it. So if if I'm dealing with a mid-size manufacturer and that submission comes in, I started to sort of tick it off before, but there's a financial document that explains their financial health, because we need to underwrite companies that are solid financially. If they're not solid financially, they could go bankrupt. That's a problem for us,
Okay.
because the care and custody of their employees could suffer as they're going through bankruptcy, and we want to be careful about that. But then we would have a list of the exposures that they're bringing to us. So if they have an auto fleet they want us to insure, there would be a list of all the vehicles, including the VINs, the type of vehicle, the value of the vehicle. All of those would come to us. If it's a property exposure, it's going to be a list of properties that they want us to insure, what goes on
Mm,
in those properties, square footage, type of construction of that property. Is it a frame structure? Is it a concrete structure?
yeah.
How close is it? Well, it's up to us to figure this out a bit, but how close is it to floodplains and such? Yes, so we were talking about what is the information that's coming in on a submission. So I would say, to summarize, there's for every exposure type of coverage that you're looking for the insurance company to underwrite for you, you have to describe what the nature uh, the exposures that you're asking us to cover. So
Yep.
the list of vehicles, the location of the buildings, the size of the buildings, the nature of the workers that are working in your plants, et cetera. All of that comes in an application. Financial information comes in. Your loss history, how many losses have you had historically? That's another important thing, because if you've had lots of losses, that's of interest to us. If
Yeah,
you've
you're more
been
risk. Yeah.
perfectly clean, that's important to know as well. It affects your rates. All of these types of documents, and maybe some description of your operations, some information about your leadership team, all of that could be as part of a package. There could be pictures of your locations, there could be financial documents, there could be spreadsheets, there could be structured application forms. All of that could make up a submission that we receive. So from your perspective, like, how do I electronically read that, right?
Yeah.
It gets to be a pretty complicated piece, right? So there are what we would call structured documents that, the industry has agreed upon application formats that you can use, called Accord. And
Okay.
Accord tends to structure what information is requested of the insured, and on that Accord form what you can expect to see. And then I would say there's a lot of unstructured data, which people send spreadsheets and Word documents and so on. And you really want to be able to read those documents electronically and sort of know what you're seeing there. I see submissions that are 100 pages long. It's not unusual.
Wow.
It could be a mishmash of all types of information that's come in there, some of it conflicting, some of it not accurate. So you really do have quite a challenge when that thing hits your inbox. They tend to come in by email.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
so
Okay.
you're looking at this 100-page document and you're having to figure out, well, is it ABC company, ABC co, comma, is it, you get all of these kind of wacky sort of
Yeah.
questions. You have addresses that don't match. You have a lot of inconsistent information you have to reconcile. And that's something that traditionally a human being has done that. But
Yeah.
you're looking to use technology to do more of that. And the technology has come along in such a way that, maybe it can read through the document and flash up on a screen for a human. Here's your two choices. Which one do you think it is? Here's the confidence interval around that. And you should choose A, not B, that type of thing. And so those are the types of rule sets that you begin to build into the submission intake process to try to
Interesting.
understand that submission.
Okay. So let me I'm drinking from the fire hose here. So
For sure.
let
Yeah.
me try to put some detail in here. So say the whole process, I don't know, does it take for a complex one, is it an hour? Is it 6 hours?
Yeah, so I'll talk about process. So what is it that you want to
Yeah.
recognize at first? Do you just want to get it in the door? That could take you just a couple of minutes to get it preliminarily in the system.
Okay.
Now, is that enough to send it over to an underwriter to look at without actually extracting all of the information? Maybe, and that might take 5 minutes. Send it to the
Okay.
underwriter, have them take a quick scan through it. Do they know this risk? It's very possible they do. They already know the company, and they'll say, "Yes, I want to work on this." Then it starts to be more complicated, right? Because you are now looking at real rates, real analysis.
Yeah.
You've got to be very precise. You want to make sure that you don't make a mistake and misclassify this particular risk into such a way that could cost you later.
So, and maybe the answer is a lot of different places here, but where in that sort of chain of custody do you first get a sense of this submission has everything I need in it, or I'm going to have to kick it back to get more information?
Yeah, again, what we've been trying to do is push that decision point to the very start.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what we would like to do. We'd like to know right out of the gate if it's complete, if there's key missing information. Is it something we can go retrieve, or is it something that we have to go back to
Okay.
the insured on? And that, that's been a bit of the challenge over the years, is to move that decision point all the way to the front, so that when the system looks at that submission on the intake, it knows exactly what it is, can strip off all the relevant information the systems will need to rate it, to price it, et cetera. That's the goal. And that's where the complexity is as well.
Interesting. So what do you think is the I'm sort of jumping ahead
No
in the
worries.
script here,
Yeah.
but what do you think is the big obstacle there to pushing that all the way to the front? Is it a tech obstacle? Is it a people obstacle? Maybe both, probably both. What is it?
Yeah. So I think the technology has been challenged by what it has to do, right?
Okay.
So it has to look at that 100 pages and really decide what's the accurate information it needs to move forward. Now, there's a lot of potential in third-party data sources out there where you could go somewhere and call a service that tells you everything I ever needed to know about ABC company.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, the question is the accuracy of that data. So you have to sort of shift your focus to say, I'm no longer maybe hindered by the technology. I now am hindered by a process to monitor data quality, which is a little different
Yeah.
cut. So if that data provider is 70% accurate or 80% accurate, which 20% is wrong? Right?
Yeah.
And those 20% questions can really get you in trouble if you underwrite the wrong risk based on the wrong data. So, that is a big concern of the insurance industry and there's a lot of suspicion about, well, we can't trust all of this data out there just yet.
Interesting.
So there's an evolution that's going on in the industry to tighten that down and to build better models that sort of negate some of that. Uh, and,
Interesting.
and that's a challenge for the industry.
Yeah. 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 Of course. Bad data in, bad decisions out, I
Yes,
guess.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So that raises the specter of the question, how accurate are the fully human processes? And is that being monitored as well? Like, is 80% quality data good comparatively, or is it sort of par? I don't know enough to answer that
Yeah.
question.
No, you're right at the heart of it. So, for instance, we talked a little bit about brokers and producers being sort of in the middle of the process. Well,
Yeah.
they don't necessarily have perfect information either. They pick up
Okay.
the phone and they call their insured, and their insured, they may have not updated that particular bit of information or data in their systems in some time. So you start out with sort of imperfect there at the source, at the customer level. And then the folks that are interpreting that from the producer level, they may very well not fully understand what they've just heard, and then they put it on an application and send it to us.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
are we sitting at 100% perfection at that point? Certainly not. Now, is something that we looked up in the marketplace through third-party data sources better than what we're getting in on our applications? Again, there's a whole methodology that you have to build to test those and retest those things, because
Yeah.
the data quality from the marketplace is actually getting better every year. So I may say, well, they're 80% this year, but next year they're going to be 82. The year after that, they're 85. So it's not a one and done kind of
Yeah.
a process. So when I talk about change management, do you have a department or a group that's responsible for monitoring data quality?
Mm.
Well, maybe you didn't historically because you never really called third-party data to do this before.
Yeah.
But in the future, don't you need it? Yeah, you probably do. You need to make sure that that stuff is well understood because you're using it to underwrite your business.
Interesting. Yeah. Over the years, I've taken lots of ML and automation projects to production, and
Yep.
I always get the question, how accurate is it going to be up front? And I always respond, well, how accurate does it need to be? And how accurate, the implication being how accurate are the humans doing it today? It's always,
For sure. Yeah.
shrug, right? I don't know.
Yep. Yeah. Right. That's a big challenge.
And you're pointing out one of the reasons that this occurs is because you've never had to think of it. It's always just, well, we do the process. And of course, we're making money doing the process. So it must be, 100% accurate. But,
What
it's
if
not
your
if you don't check.
what if your competitor builds a better process for validating that data? And you're competing against them and you're
Yeah.
writing risks that you probably shouldn't write because their data process is better than yours. I mean, this is the hidden competitive pressure that the industry feels. right? It isn't just that our price is better, it's what goes into that decision. Are you a better analysis company because of the infrastructure that you
Right.
built than your competition? Now, that you may not win because of that in the first year, but over the course of time, you're
Yeah.
going to win if you've got a better mousetrap that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Let's keep pushing in there. I interrupted you at some point. You were talking about that handoff from the data intake to the underwriter. What happens from there?
Yeah, so again, it really is how much technology do you provide the underwriter in their analysis. So, we talked earlier about the diversity of companies that an underwriter might be asked to underwrite, and having good knowledge of the exposures. Well, there are guidelines that most companies have about what's a good risk and what's a bad risk.
Yeah.
But there are so many of them. How does the underwriter keep those fresh in their mind at any point in time, right? So,
Right.
can I provide technology that picks out the right rules that push uh, red flags in front of the underwriter for exceptions that are inside of that submission that they've received that say, hey, this particular location is in an area that you might want to give them closer attention, right? And look at that and ask some more questions of the company about, have you accounted for all these risks? And those are the types of things that make for an effective underwriter, right? And so the questions for the underwriter start to be data driven, right? So there, that an exposure exists within the submission, but now you're trying to push out in front of them some guidance as to, hey, this is why this is important because they could face this type of loss, and you should ask about this. Now, if they miss that and they write it, and the loss happens, and not much you can do about it, right?
Yeah.
It's water under the bridge, so to speak. So those are the types of things that start to happen after it's gotten through its initial paces, where you say it's a financially sound company, it's a type of market or a type of risk we want to write. Now I have to really dig into it, and I can look at the losses, their prior losses, and that's the more actuarial driven type of approach. But you also want to get at some of the softer analysis around the actual exposures that you're being presented with.
Interesting. So it sounds like it's a bit of art and a bit of science. Is
It,
that what I'm hearing? Yeah.
that's it's often said that way.
And how yeah, I don't you may not be able to answer this question, but how does a good underwriter become better at the art side of it? Like I can imagine how the science gets better, better data, better tools, but how do you get better at the art side of it? What makes that easier?
Yeah, well, I mean, tends to be that's where you're looking for more experienced underwriters when you're
Okay.
out there, someone that's maybe seen some of this type of risk before. You do it by segmentation to a certain extent. So, say I want to write a lot of construction risks. Well, I build up a group of underwriters who have done a lot of this type of work, and they know the questions to ask, so you have specialization. But the problem is you can't specialize in everything. So what tends to
Okay.
be the case is you'll specialize in where you have enough volume to specialize, but it's very difficult to maintain that. So what's the solution? The solution is sort of smart knowledge management that can
Okay.
actually push out in front of the underwriters questions and topics for considerations.
Okay.
That's a really important part of it.
Interesting. All right. Let's swing back to a few things that you mentioned earlier. One of them, you name dropped a couple of technologies like Guidewire and Duck Creek, names that people who are in the industry have heard. Um, in your career, which, as you're thinking about augmenting and automating some parts of this process, what are the tools and solutions that you've had success with?
Yeah, so process flow is a big part of our world. And so, you'll hear about Pegasus systems and Appian and
Okay.
Encore. Uncork's really hot right now because of their no code type of approach. So
Mm,
setting up the right processes to move by exception work to the right person to make those decisions
yep.
is a big body of work inside insurance companies. Like, I've got this exposure, I might want to have this person take a look at this, and so I want to move that particular body of work over to that person. And getting that business process management correct is a big part of the insurance industry, right? Is making sure that that's done correctly. Now, the Duck Creek and Guidewire, though they would claim that they're more than this, but they've really focused largely on policy administration. So
Okay.
they look at all of that complexity and product that you described earlier, building those products, maintaining them, and building systems that make it easy to rate policies and issue policies are things that Guidewire and Duck Creek have historically worked on. What they're trying to do now, Majesco is another one, and they're trying to spend a lot more time on the underwriting risk assessment side of the house. They're trying to move into that area, uh,
Ah,
more of the underwriting decision support, less of the actual sort of mechanics of generating rates and forms. They're trying to do more of the, well, is this a good risk or a bad risk type
yep.
of assessment? But I'd say they're earlier in that journey than others. There are a number of companies out there now, folks like Send, which is a new entrant to the marketplace, or Federato, folks that are focused on the decision support, things that we talked about,
Okay.
pushing alerts to the underwriters and helping them manage their desktop. We're fresh from uh, a project of talking to a lot of underwriters out in the field, and
Yeah.
they talk about the scavenger hunts. The industry is rife with trying to find the right data at the right time is really
Yeah.
a real challenge. They could have 6 or 8 windows open on their desktops at once looking for information. They could have a rating spreadsheet open. They could have a website open. I mean, it is not surprising to see that activity
Wow.
go on for an underwriter in a lot of companies, and that's a real challenge for them. So there are folks that are trying to build more rational integrations that would sort of present this information to underwriters a lot more effectively.
Interesting. All right. So let me try to put that all together. So in terms of like a high level architecture, and correct me where I'm wrong here, you have like a workflow engine, right?
Yeah,
Um, and at the beginning of that is, some sort of way of getting the data in
yeah,
as a raw package, and then that I assume, there are various subcomponents of that workflow. Then the policy administration system has to integrate with that workflow, I assume at various points along the
yes,
way.
that's correct.
And then all of that has to route to the underwriting systems, whatever they may be. And there has to be back and forth with that workflow as well.
That's correct.
Um, and I'm guessing there's enough variability between companies for all of these components that in the near term, there's not going to be sort of a single system that rules them all. You're going to need the flexibility in each component, such that sort of wiring these things together is is what's viable, rather than we installed X and X just does all of it. Is that a fair read?
Chris, you're ready for the industry. But
Much
that's
appreciated.
that's a really good quick summary of the complexity that's facing the industry,
Okay.
is to try to make those various components talk to one another, and each of those components tries to step out of their little area and take on chunks of the other systems, right? And
Okay.
and
Yeah.
so you have to
Border
fit.
conflicts. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Fit for purpose becomes a really important, kind of consideration as you're choosing to purchase these systems and to implement them. Which are your systems of record? It's a huge, huge topic in our world in terms of figuring out which system is really going to govern the interaction with the underwriter, and that is a real source of confusion and debate as you're building these systems.
Interesting. All right. We're coming up on our time together. I feel like we could spend the rest of the day talking about this, and maybe I'll ask you about that later on. But bringing it back to unstructured data, You talked about integration of these various components, sort of hub and spoke, being really, really important. Where does the ability to automatically, OCR, AI extraction of data, automatic classification of documents as ready to go or not, all of that sort of package of things that you could do with a computer vision solution or an ML solution, in terms of what's hard and what's valuable for this industry, where does that type of capability fall, assuming it exists and assuming it works well?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about the intake process. I think in the long run, that is the place, right? So I'm going to
Okay.
take that submission, I'm going to I'm going to read it electronically, and I'm going to figure out which systems of the three that you sort of described. Is it a workflow issue? Is it a policy administration issue? Is it an underwriting issue? It will look at those and say, these are the data points for each of those activities, right? So I'm going to need to rate this. So my list of data needed to rate ends up needing to go into my policy administration system so I can rate it. If I need to learn more about the nature of the operations, maybe that goes into a third-party data call, and that ends up in the underwriting system so that when the underwriter looks at it, they have a good understanding of the nature of that particular risk and can move forward effectively. And your business rules logic can kick in behind the scenes to sort of push alerts to the underwriter.
Mm,
The workflow component is like, is this an exception? Does this need early attention? Do I need
yeah.
to go? Well, that might need to go to a different person. And where is the data missing? And how does that feed a BPM tool that might send it over to another party who would round out the data and then move it back into the process? So those pieces. So I'd say all of that is really targeted really at the upfront when I get that submission in the door.
Interesting. And would you say, again, outside of the sort of integration being the tough part today, would you say that sort of speeding up, perfecting, tweaking that intake part, is that a higher priority than, say, data integrity from third-party systems or better underwriting, rate engines?
Yeah, and it sort of depends on the pain points that you have within
Okay.
your industry. Like if you within your company, if you have a lot of operational challenges, then that becomes your driver, right? I can't get things rated and issued
Uh,
very effectively. Well, then maybe I need to spend a lot more time on that and using these tools to actually accelerate that to get things rated faster might be something that you really focus on. If I've sort of got that one solved, and really what I'm trying to do is sort of accelerate the decision velocity, then
yep.
maybe what I'm doing is I'm taking that information in and I'm feeding it into a module that will go call data sources and bring that information back for the underwriter. And maybe that's where I'm going to spend all my time in this process because my operations are pretty tight. You sort of have to look at what is the company perspective on this because I think there are a number of angles on that technology. But
Yeah.
yeah, getting a fast answer back to your agent, and you have to turn this back around to look outside in and say, well, what is your customer's
Yeah.
biggest concern, right? It's taking forever to get a quote, or the accuracy of the quote isn't good, or the pricing isn't matching, or the quality isn't there in terms of what policy documents they receive. I mean, there's a lot of cuts on this.
Fascinating. The insurance is more interesting every time I look at it. Well, at this point, we should probably wrap it up. My guest today has been Art Borden, who is a vet in the underwriting process and technology space. Art, thanks for just really laying out your expertise for us today. It was a great conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care.